I remember the exact weight of that Tuesday evening. The way the Georgia humidity pressed against the windows like a second skin, the smell of my mother's pot roast curling through the hallway, and the sound of my own heartbeat going completely silent the moment I opened the front door. My name is Naomi Elaine Prescott, and this is the story of how I lost everything in a single night, and exactly how I got it all back. I was 31 years old when my fiancé, Derek, asked me to marry him. We had been together for 4 years. 4 years of Sunday morning pancakes and late-night hospital shifts, because I was a surgical resident, and he was the man who always had dinner waiting when I came home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. He proposed on a Thursday in our kitchen with no cameras and no crowd. Just him, and me, and a ring he'd saved up for quietly over 8 months without saying a word. That was Derek. Steady. Thoughtful. The kind of man you build a life around without even realizing you're doing it. The engagement was 6 weeks old when everything collapsed. My younger sister, Jade, had always been the beautiful one. That was simply the family shorthand, not mean-spirited, just accepted. I was the smart one, the driven one, the daughter who made our parents proud at school board meetings. Jade was the one who made strangers stop mid-sentence in parking lots. She had our late grandmother's cheekbones and a laugh that made rooms rearrange themselves around her. Growing up, I never resented her for it. That's what I told myself, anyway. Jade had moved back home 8 months before the proposal. Some vague trouble with a job in Atlanta, a lease that fell through, a story that kept changing depending on who she was telling it to. My mother welcomed her back with open arms and a redecorated bedroom. I lent her money without being asked. Derek was kind to her, the way he was kind to everyone, offering to fix her car, including her in dinners, making her feel like part of something. I see now what I couldn't see then. The night my world ended started like 100 other Tuesday nights. I had finished a double shift. My feet ached. I hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. I pulled into the driveway of the house Derek and I shared. Yes, we lived together, yes, my mother had opinions about that, and I noticed Jade's car parked at the curb. Not unusual. She visited often. I didn't even think twice. What I heard when I reached the front porch stopped me before my key touched the lock. Laughter. Jade's laughter. That full, unself-conscious sound that I had heard my whole life. And then Derek's voice, low and warm, saying something I couldn't make out. And then silence. A particular kind of silence that has its own specific texture. One that a woman recognizes in her bones before her brain has caught up. I opened the door. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The pot on the stove had been turned off. And the door to the bedroom, our bedroom, was closed in a way it had never been closed before when I came home. Like a boundary. Like a warning. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a full minute, maybe longer, my keys still in my hand, my hospital badge still clipped to my scrub pocket. And somewhere behind that door, something was happening that was about to rearrange the entire geography of my life. I reached out and turned the handle. And what I saw on the other side of that door is something I still cannot describe without my hands going cold, because it wasn't just betrayal. It was the specific, surgical kind that leaves no clean edges. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves as life-changing until you're already standing inside them. This was one of those moments, and it was worse than anything my exhausted, trusting brain had imagined in the half-second between reaching for the handle and pushing the door open. Derek and Jade. Together. In our bed. With the audacity of people who had been doing this long enough to feel comfortable. I didn't scream. I want to be clear about that. I didn't throw things or collapse against the doorframe in the way that happens in movies. I simply stood there, and in that stillness, something inside me made a very quiet decision. The kind of decision you don't fully understand until years later when you look back and realize that was the moment you chose yourself. Derek scrambled upright, saying my name, reaching for words that don't exist for a situation like this one. Jade pulled the sheet up. She actually pulled the sheet up and looked at me with those eyes. And there was something in them I hadn't expected. Not guilt. Not shame. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief, like a secret she was tired of carrying had just been handed over to someone else. I set my keys on the dresser. Quietly. Deliberately. And I said, I need you both to be gone before I finish my shower. I turned around. I walked to the bathroom. I turned the water on, got in fully clothed, and stood under the stream until the shaking stopped. By the time I came out 45 minutes later, they were gone. The ring was still on my finger. That detail felt important, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. What followed in the next 72 hours was the particular kind of family chaos that only happens when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are forced to choose between truth and comfort. My mother called me 3 times the first day, not to console me, but to ask me to hear Jade out. My father, a quiet man who communicated mostly through sighs and sports updates, sent me a single text. These things happen. Don't make it bigger than it is. Don't make it bigger than it is. As if the thing that had happened were a minor misunderstanding. A borrowed blouse returned with a stain. A forgotten birthday. Not my fiancé and my sister, in my bed, 6 weeks after he had put a ring on my hand. I moved out of the house within the week. I took my clothes, my medical school diplomas, my grandmother's china, and nothing else. Derek called 17 times in 4 days. I answered once, on the 3rd day when exhaustion overruled pride, and he used the word complicated, which told me everything I needed to know about how little he understood what he had done. Jade didn't call at all. For the first 2 weeks, that silence was the loudest thing in my life. Then, 3 weeks after the night I opened that bedroom door, my mother called with news delivered in the careful, braced tone of someone who expects a reaction they don't want to deal with. Jade and Derek were together. Officially. They were in love. And they wanted the family to understand, and they hoped we could all move forward. I sat on the floor of my new apartment, a sparse, unfurnished place that smelled like fresh paint and other people's decisions, and I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Shift. Like tectonic plates rearranging into a new formation. I told my mother very calmly that I wished them both well. And I meant it, not in the generous, spiritually evolved way people mean it when they've healed, but in the hollow, dangerous way you mean it when you have made a decision about your own life that has nothing to do with them anymore. I was done. Not angry. Not devastated. Done. What I didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this ending was actually the beginning of something they would never see coming. And the instrument of that beginning was already waiting for me, 3 time zones away, in a city I had never considered living in. Seattle was not a plan. It was a posting, a fellowship opportunity that landed in my email inbox 4 days after I moved into that empty apartment, as though the universe had decided to stop being subtle. Johns Hopkins, Affiliated Surgical Fellowship, Pacific Northwest Regional Medical Center, 2 years, full funding. I had applied 8 months earlier and mostly forgotten about it, back when my life still had Derek in it, back when the future looked like a specific house in a specific neighborhood with a specific man's last name attached to mine. I accepted within 48 hours. I didn't tell my family until my flight was booked. My mother cried, the complicated kind of crying that is partly grief and partly guilt, and partly the discomfort of realizing that the stable daughter is now the one behaving unpredictably. My father asked if Seattle was expensive. Jade sent a text that said, "I really hope you find happiness, Naomi." I read it 3 times trying to find sincerity in it, and came away with nothing I could use. I landed in Seattle on a gray October morning with 2 suitcases, a carry-on, and a thorough understanding of what it means to rebuild from the foundation up. The fellowship was brutal in the best possible way. 90-hour weeks. Cases that pushed the edges of what I thought I could do technically. Attendings who didn't care about your personal life, only your precision. For 14 months, I lived inside my work the way other people live inside relationships. It was all-consuming, demanding, constantly asking more than I thought I had left to give. And slowly, painfully it rebuilt me. Not back into the person I was before that bedroom door. Into someone sharper. Quieter. More deliberate. It was in month 15 that I met Caleb. Dr. Caleb Osei was a trauma surgeon from Accra, Ghana, who had done his residency at Stanford and arrived at our program as a visiting consultant on a joint research project. He walked into our department on a Wednesday morning like he had always been there. Unhurried, precise, with the specific confidence of a man who has nothing to prove because he has already proven it to himself. We were not immediately friends. We were colleagues who respected each other's work, which, in a surgical department, is a form of intimacy in itself. He noticed things, the way I talked to patients, the way I held a room during difficult family conversations, the way I took notes in the margins of my conference programs. He noticed without commenting, which was unusual enough to be noteworthy. The first real conversation we had that wasn't about a patient happened over terrible vending machine coffee at 2 a.m. after a particularly long trauma case. He asked me where I grew up. I told him Georgia. He said he'd spent a year in Atlanta during a research rotation and had strong feelings about sweet tea. I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. We talked for 3 hours in that break room. About medicine, about family, about the particular loneliness of being excellent at something that consumes you. I didn't tell him about Derek and Jade that night. But when I got home at 5 a.m, I noticed that something in my chest that had been locked since Georgia felt, not healed exactly, but loosened. That was November. By February, we were having dinner regularly. By April, he had told me about his own past, a broken engagement, years earlier, to a woman who wanted a different kind of life than he was able to offer. By June, we both understood what was happening between us, though neither of us had named it yet. Caleb was the first person since the night I opened that bedroom door who made me feel like my wholeness was not something I needed to perform. He saw me directly, the competence and the wound and the stubborn, armor-plated humor I used to keep people at a comfortable distance. And he didn't try to navigate around any of it. He simply stayed. We got married quietly, 14 months after we met. City Hall, 2 witnesses from our department, and dinner afterward at a restaurant that made the best jollof rice I had ever tasted outside of someone's actual home kitchen. No engagement party. No family drama. No ring shopping with my mother or venue tours, or any of the ceremonial machinery that had surrounded my previous almost life. Just a decision, made by 2 people who understood exactly what they were choosing. I called my mother the evening after. She was hurt that she hadn't been there. I told her that I needed this to be mine. She went quiet in a way that said she understood more than she was able to articulate. I did not contact Jade. There was nothing to say that would have served either of us. She had Derek. She had the family table. She had whatever she had been working toward the moment she pulled that sheet up and looked at me with that strange, unashamed relief. She was welcome to all of it. And for 2 years that was how things stood, until my mother called about the dinner. The one that would change everything. But first, I need to tell you what I didn't know about my sister's life. Because the dinner table has 2 sides, and I was only seeing one of them. My mother has a specific way of framing requests that makes them feel less like requests and more like scheduled inevitabilities. She doesn't ask. She announces, then waits for you to realize that your objection is the thing that will sound unreasonable. It's a talent. I've spent 35 years watching it operate on everyone around her, and still find myself occasionally outmaneuvered. The call came on a Thursday evening in late March, 4 years, 2 months, and 11 days after the Tuesday I opened that bedroom door, though I was not counting. Your father's 65th birthday, she said, in the tone of someone reading from a prepared statement. I'm doing a dinner. The whole family. I need you to be there. I was at my kitchen counter in Seattle, still in scrubs, reviewing post-op notes on my tablet. Caleb was somewhere in the apartment behind me, probably on a call with his research team. The word whole family landed between us with the weight it always carried. Jade will be there, I said. It wasn't a question. Naomi. A pause designed to communicate that the topic of Jade was exhausting to her. It's been 4 years. Your father is 65 years old. He wants his daughters at his table. I thought about the word daughters. I thought about what that word had meant in our house growing up. The twinning of it, the way Jade and I had been assembled in people's minds as a unit, the smart one and the beautiful one, as though we were 2 halves of one complete woman rather than 2 separate people with separate lives and separate wounds. I thought about Derek. Whether he would be there. Whether I cared. Surprisingly, I didn't. Not in the searing way I once had. Derek had become, over 4 years, a kind of emotional scar tissue. Present, visible if you looked for it, but no longer the site of active pain. He was just a decision I had once made about a person who had not been who I believed him to be. I had made better decisions since. It was Jade I was thinking about. The way she had never called after she left my apartment that night. The text about happiness she'd sent when I moved to Seattle. The complete, confident silence of someone who believes the story has been settled in her favor. I said yes to the dinner. Not for my father, though I love him, in the complicated way that you love people who love you imperfectly. I said yes because something in me needed to see it. The life they had built. The normal they had constructed over the wreckage of mine. I needed to look at it directly and confirm that I was who I believed I was now. A woman who had not just survived, but had built something extraordinary on the other side of their choices. Caleb, when I told him, was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you want me to come?" I looked at him standing in our kitchen. This man who had never once made me feel small, who had proposed by cooking me a full Ghanaian feast at midnight after a 36-hour shift, who had held my hand in the dark on the nights when the old grief surfaced and never once told me to hurry up and be done with it. This man who, to my entire family, did not yet exist. I said, Yes. But I want to do one thing first. He raised an eyebrow. Patient. Waiting. I want to walk in alone. I want to sit through the dinner. I need to see their faces, my sister's face, when things are still normal. Before they know. He understood without requiring more explanation. That was the thing about Caleb. He understood me at the sentence level, not the paragraph level. He already knew what I was planning without me having to describe it. And he didn't warn me against it or counsel caution or ask whether I was sure. He simply said, "Tell me when to be there." I flew to Georgia 4 days later. Caleb flew separately to a hotel 20 minutes from my parents' house. I was armed with nothing except the truth about my life. And I was walking into a room where everyone expected to find the version of me that had been left behind, broken, quietly diminished, reconstructed from whatever scraps remained after the fire. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Not even Jade, who laughed the most, the loudest, and the longest at dinner that night, until she looked up and saw the door open. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The house smelled exactly the same. That was the first thing. Pot roast and lemon cleaning solution, and the faint ghost of the gardenia candles my mother had been buying from the same boutique in Buckhead for 20 years. Walking through that front door was a form of time travel. My body remembered things my mind had been working hard to process differently. My father met me in the entryway, and for a moment looking at him, slightly thinner, gray at the temples in a way I hadn't registered over video calls, eyes going soft with something that might have been guilt if he were the type to name it. I almost lost the steadiness I had spent the flight cultivating. He hugged me. He said, "You look good, Naomi. You look really good." I said, "So do you, Dad." And then I followed the sound of voices into the dining room. They were already at the table. My Aunt Celeste, who had always been my mother's ally in all family debates. My cousin Brandon and his wife, Tara, who I liked genuinely. My mother's church friend, Miss Gloria, who had known me since I was 6 and always smelled like rose water. And Derek. And Jade. They were seated next to each other, close in the way of people who have assigned each other the label of permanent. Jade wore a yellow dress that made her look exactly as she always had, effortlessly, irritatingly beautiful. Derek wore a button-down I didn't recognize, which for some reason felt like the most concrete evidence that time had actually passed. Jade looked up when I walked in. For 1/2 second, her face did something complicated. A flash of something genuine, something that might have been old guilt or old love, or just the particular discomfort of being seen by someone you have wronged. Then she arranged her expression into something warmly performative. "Naomi." She stood up and crossed the room and hugged me, actually hugged me, and she smelled like the same perfume she'd been wearing since college. "You look amazing. Seattle must be agreeing with you." "It really is," I said. Derek stood too, offered a hand, and I shook it the way you shake the hand of someone you once knew well and no longer need to know at all. He had put on a little weight. He looked comfortable. Happy even. I examined my own reaction to that and found nothing raw. Just information. I sat down. My mother brought wine. The conversation moved through its familiar channels. My father's impending retirement, Brandon's new house, Aunt Celeste's opinions about the neighborhood changing, Miss Gloria's grandchildren. Normal family machinery. And then, 20 minutes in, Jade began. It was subtle at first. The way she talked about their renovation, the house she and Derek had bought, the kitchen she had redesigned. She mentioned Derek's promotion at the firm. She mentioned a vacation they'd taken to Portugal. She was not speaking to me specifically, but she was performing for me. I could feel it in the angle of her body, the frequency with which her eyes checked my face. She was measuring, waiting to see the damage she could still do. And then Miss Gloria, dear innocent Miss Gloria, asked the question that set everything in motion. "Naomi, sweetheart, what about you? Seeing anyone special out there in Seattle?" The table went slightly quiet. The particular quiet of people who know a subject is sensitive and are waiting to see who blinks first. I looked at Miss Gloria. I looked at my mother, who was holding her wine glass too carefully. I looked at Jade, who had settled into her chair with a small, satisfied curve at the corner of her mouth. The smile of someone who believes they already know the answer to the question being asked. I said, "Actually, yes." The room rearranged itself, almost imperceptibly. Jade's smile held. "Waiting. I got married," I said. "About 18 months ago." The silence that followed was a specific, crystalline thing. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people are all simultaneously revising the story they believed they were inside. Jade's smile faltered just slightly. Just enough. My mother set her wine glass down. My father looked at me with something I can only describe as complicated pride. Aunt Celeste said, "Married?" in the tone of someone who had missed a crucial episode of a show they thought they'd been following closely. "His name is Caleb," I said. "He's a trauma surgeon. We met at the hospital." "Well, where is he?" Miss Gloria demanded, with the delighted urgency of someone who has been handed a gift mid-dinner. And this was the moment Jade decided to reassert control. To remind the table, and herself, of what she believed the hierarchy still was. She laughed. Not a small laugh. A full, bright, generous laugh, the kind designed to make something sound smaller than it is. "Naomi," she said in the fond, slightly condescending tone of a person addressing someone they've decided to find amusing, "you should have brought him. Unless—" and here she glanced at Derek with a private little smile that was meant only for him. "He's not quite ready for the family." The implication was clear. To everyone at that table, it was clear. The suggestion that I had invented or exaggerated, that whatever I had in Seattle was fragile or not quite real, that Jade sat at this table with her chosen man while I arrived alone with a story. She settled back in her chair, satisfied, the laugh still in her eyes. Derek looked down at his plate, and then my phone buzzed. One text. 3 words. "Ready when you are." I looked at the text. I looked at my sister's face, that comfortable, practiced confidence of a woman who believes she has already won. And I excused myself from the table very calmly, walked to the front door and opened it. What happened when that door swung wide is something no one at that table has stopped talking about since. Caleb was standing on my parents' front porch in a charcoal suit I had never seen him wear. He must have bought it specifically. With the quiet, unhurried composure of a man who has walked into complicated rooms before and knows that his steadiness is itself a form of authority. He was objectively breathtaking. And I say this not as his wife, but as a woman capable of recognizing when a room is about to shift entirely on its axis. He looked at me first. Not the house, not the doorway, not the family table visible through the entryway. Me. His eyes asked a single question without words. "Are you all right?" I answered without words, "Yes." "Come in." I took his hand, and we walked inside together. The dining room table went silent in a way that is different from the previous silence. This one was not the quiet of revision, it was the quiet of complete suspension. Every fork held midair. Every thought interrupted. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Aunt Celeste made a sound I have no category for. Miss Gloria, wonderful uncomplicated Miss Gloria, immediately broke the silence with a loud, delighted, "Oh my lord." Jade's face. I had not allowed myself to imagine this moment, because I knew that if I imagined it too specifically I would start to want it too much. And wanting something too much makes you cruel in ways you don't intend. But Jade's face in that moment was beyond anything I had constructed in any private imagining. The laugh was gone. The comfortable confidence gone. What replaced it was something much more vulnerable and much more honest than anything I had seen on my sister's face since we were children. Pure, unguarded shock. The shock of someone who has built their entire self-narrative on a particular version of events, and who has just watched that version become suddenly, irrevocably insufficient. Derek looked up from his plate. His jaw tightened. He looked at Caleb the way men sometimes look at things they cannot categorize quickly enough. "Everyone," I said, in a voice that I was proud of for its evenness. "This is my husband, Dr. Caleb Osei." Caleb turned the full force of his considerable warmth toward the table. "It's a real pleasure," he said, in the voice he uses with patients' families, grounded, genuine, carrying no performance. "Happy birthday, sir," he said directly to my father, who stood up and shook his hand with the sudden energy of a man who has just been reminded of something important. My mother recovered fastest. She always does. She was up from her chair with the trained hospitality of a Southern woman who can pivot a room through sheer social will, pulling out the chair next to mine, asking Caleb whether he'd eaten, saying they had plenty and he was so welcome and she was just so happy to finally meet him. Jade had not moved. She sat in her yellow dress with her hands in her lap, and the ghost of her earlier laugh still visible on her face like something left behind that she hadn't figured out how to retrieve. I sat down next to Caleb. He found my hand under the table and held it once, briefly, just long enough, and then let go, because we are both people who understand that some things don't need to be performed. The dinner resumed. Slowly, then all at once, the way dinners do. But the geometry of that table had changed completely. And everyone at it could feel the new shape, even if they couldn't have put words to it. The story that Jade had been telling herself for 4 years. The The story in which she had made the decisive, winning move, in which Naomi was the cautionary tale and she was the protagonist, that story had just been rewritten by the simple act of a door opening. I watched my sister across the table. I watched her try to recover, try to re-enter conversations, try to reclaim Derek's attention, try to reassemble the particular ease she had worn when I first walked in. But something had gone out of her. Some certainty. Some comfortable assumption that the story ended the way she had written it. She looked at me once, directly across the table. And in that look I saw something I had not expected to feel anything about. She looked lonely. Not defeated in the triumphant way I might have once wanted to see. Lonely in the way of a person who has just realized that the thing they chose came with costs they hadn't fully calculated. And I sat with that, with the complexity of it, because I am not a person who enjoys other people's pain, not even the pain of someone who caused mine. But I also did not look away. I held her gaze and I let her see me. All of me, the wife and the surgeon and the woman who had rebuilt herself from scratch in a city that had no record of her wounds. I let her look at that because she needed to see it, and because I had earned the right to be seen. Dinner ended. Dessert came and went. My father blew out the candles on his birthday cake, and made a wish with his eyes closed and his 2 daughters on either side of the table, both of them changed. And then, as people began to drift toward the living room and the kitchen, Jade touched my arm. "Can we talk?" she said. I looked at her. I thought about all the phone calls she hadn't made. All the silences. The text about happiness. "Yes," I said. What she said next changed something in me that I hadn't expected to still be changeable. We stood in the hallway between the dining room and my old bedroom. The same hallway I had walked through the night I came home to find her car at the curb. The same walls my mother had repainted 3 times since I'd left home. The same narrow space where Jade and I had whispered secrets and argued over the bathroom mirror and once, when we were 11 and 9, fallen asleep sitting up against the wall during a thunderstorm because neither of us wanted to admit we were scared. She looked smaller than she had at the table. This surprised me, because Jade has always known how to take up a room. Without the performance, without the audience, she looked like what she actually was, my younger sister, tired, standing in our parents' hallway in a yellow dress, trying to find a way to start a sentence. "He's not who I thought he was," she said. I said nothing. I had made a decision before this conversation started that I would let her arrive at whatever she needed to say without my helping her get there. "Derek." She said his name like it was a word she had been using so long it had worn smooth. "He's not. It's not what I wanted it to be." I waited. "He did the same thing to me," she said. "Last year. I found out there was someone at his office." She stopped. Started again. "I stayed because I thought if I left then it would mean." She paused and I watched her trying to assemble the logic of a feeling she had probably never said out loud. "It would mean I destroyed your life for nothing." The hallway was very quiet. From the living room, I could hear Caleb laughing at something my Aunt Celeste had said. My father's voice asking someone about coffee. The particular familiar chaos of family in the after-dinner hour. "Jade," I said. She looked at me. "I need you to understand something. What happened between you and Derek is not a debt you owe me. What you did to me was wrong. It was genuinely wrong, and you know that. But you don't get to stay in a bad life as punishment for it, and you don't get to use me as the reason you're not choosing yourself." Her eyes filled. She blinked. "I spent a year being so angry at you," I said. "Angry in the way that you're angry when someone you love does something you never prepared for." And then I stopped. Not because I forgave you in some grand, clean way. It wasn't like that. I stopped because I was in Seattle and it was raining and I had this fellowship and this life, and you stopped being the center of my pain. You became a chapter that had ended. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Caleb is the best decision I have ever made," I said. "And I might not have made it if the bedroom door hadn't happened. I'm not saying you did me a favor. I'm saying the story is more complicated than what you told yourself in order to live with it." She was crying now, quietly, with the contained grief of someone who learned early that falling apart in front of people has consequences. "I don't know what to do," she said. "About Derek. About any of it." "I know," I said. "But that's your chapter to write. Not mine." I hugged her, briefly, genuinely. The way you hug someone who is both the cause of your pain and still, after everything, your family. She held on a moment longer than I expected. Then we separated, and she straightened her back, and she did that thing she has always done since childhood. Composed herself from the outside in, like a woman putting on armor in the wrong order. We walked back into the living room. Caleb caught my eye from across the room. One raised eyebrow. I gave him a barely perceptible nod. I'm all right. He went back to the conversation with my father, and I watched the two of them. The steady man who had been chosen for me by my worst night, and something in me settled into a place of complete, uncomplicated gratitude. What I didn't know yet was that the night wasn't done. Because Derek, who had been quietly watching from the margins all evening, had also been making a decision. And he had just decided to make his move. He found me in the kitchen. I was helping my mother wrap leftovers, an automatic, familiar task that my hands knew how to do without my attention, and I heard his footsteps and knew them before I turned around. Some things you learn with your body, and never fully unlearn. Naomi. His voice was careful, constructed. My mother, reading the room with the instinct of a woman who has been managing this family's weather systems for 40 years, found an urgent reason to check on something in the other room. I turned around. Derek was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, a posture I recognized as his version of trying to look comfortable when he wasn't. He's impressive, he said, with a tone I couldn't fully locate. He is, I agreed. Surgeon. He said it the way you say a word you're still deciding how to feel about. Trauma surgeon, yes. A pause. He looked down at the floor and then back up, and something in his face went unguarded in a way that I recognized from years of knowing him. It was the expression he made when he was about to say something he had been rehearsing. I made a mistake, he said. What we did, I need you to know that I know that. I held a piece of aluminum foil in my hand and looked at him. I thought about the 31-year-old version of me who had stood in the shower fully clothed and shaken until the water ran cold. I thought about the 17 calls I hadn't answered. I thought about the word complicated. Derek, I said. I know you know it. I've known that for a long time. He stopped. Started again. Seeing you tonight. Seeing how you are. It made me think about. Stop, I said. Not unkindly, but clearly. He stopped. Whatever you were about to say next, I need you to hear me first. I'm not a mirror for your regret. I don't exist in your story as the one who got away, or the lesson you learned, or whatever makes this feel resolved for you. I'm Naomi. I'm a person. And I'm fine, genuinely completely fine. Not fine like someone who has been managing. Fine like someone who is actually, unexpectedly happy. He was quiet. You should go be with Jade, I said. Or you should leave. One of those two things is right. Figure out which one. He straightened. Nodded once, the tight, honest nod of a man who has received something he asked for and found it different from what he expected. He walked out of the kitchen. I turned back to the counter and finished wrapping the pot roast. My hands were perfectly steady. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 45 seconds later, which told me he had been nearby without being intrusive. A distinction he navigates with the precision he brings to everything. How are you doing? He asked. I just told a man I was going to marry that I was fine and completely meant it, I said. I think that's what closure actually feels like. Caleb came around the counter and stood beside me and stole a piece of leftover cornbread without asking, which was so perfectly, specifically him that I laughed out loud. Your dad and I were talking, he said. He wants to know if we'll come back for Thanksgiving. I looked at him. I thought about what it meant that Caleb had, in the course of a single dinner, so thoroughly woven himself into the fabric of my family that my father was already planning the next occasion. What did you tell him? I told him I'd have to check with my wife. I put the aluminum foil down and leaned my head against his shoulder for exactly 3 seconds. Enough to mean something without needing commentary. Yes, I said. Thanksgiving. We'll come back. We walked back out to where the family was assembled, and I looked at the room. My parents, my aunt, my cousin, Miss Gloria, and my sister standing slightly apart from Derek with something quietly resolving itself in the space between them. And I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in this house for 4 years. I felt at home. Not the old home. The new one. The one you build inside yourself when the old structures have been cleared. But there was still one more thing. One piece that hadn't yet been accounted for. And it arrived the next morning, in a way none of us had expected. I slept in my old bedroom that night. Caleb was at the hotel, which had felt right. One night of allowing the house to settle around this new version of me before bringing him fully inside the family's rhythms. We texted until midnight, the way we always do when we're in different places. And then I slept in the bed I'd had since I was 16, under a ceiling that still had a small crack in the plaster I used to stare at when I was studying for finals, and I felt, for the first time in 4 years, that I had fully returned to something without being diminished by it. In the morning I came downstairs at 7 to find my mother already in the kitchen. Just the two of us in the early light, with coffee and the kind of quiet that has its own vocabulary. She handed me a mug without being asked. She sat down across from me. And for a long moment we didn't say anything at all, which is sometimes the most honest form of communication available to mothers and daughters. Then she said, "He's wonderful, Naomi." I wrapped my hands around the mug. "I know. I want you to know," she said slowly, choosing words with the deliberateness of someone who has been arranging them for a while, "that I handled things wrong. 4 years ago. I was trying to keep the peace and she stopped. There isn't a version of this where that was the right call. Asking you to hear her out. Making you feel like it was a situation that could be managed. I put the family's comfort over she paused. Over what you were owed." I looked at her. My mother, who has always been more comfortable with action than with language, sitting across from me at 6:58 in the morning with her coffee and her guilt, offering me the most direct apology I had ever received from her. "Mom," I said. She looked at me. "I needed to go to Seattle." I said it simply. I needed to build the life I have. And I don't know if I would have done that if everyone had handled everything perfectly. Sometimes the wrong thing happening in the wrong way is the exact direction you needed to be pushed. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's very generous." "I'm not being generous," I said. "I'm being accurate." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, briefly, warmly, and then pulled it back and drank her coffee, because we are not, either of us, women who can sustain sentiment for long without needing to pivot into practicality. "Jade came down at midnight," she said. I looked up. She told me she's leaving Derek. I held that information for a moment. Not with triumph. With something more complicated. The recognition that the consequences of one night 4 years ago were still arriving, still distributing themselves across everyone who had been present for it, and would continue to do so for some time yet. "That's her decision to make," I said. "I know," my mother said. "I just wanted you to know that I think," she paused again, "I think she's finally making the right ones." We finished our coffee. The house began to wake up, my father's footsteps overhead, the sound of a door, the particular morning sounds of a home that has been lived in long enough to develop its own rhythms. And then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was a number I didn't have saved, but with a Georgia area code. I answered. What I heard on the other end of that call was something that made me stand up from the table, so quickly my chair scraped back against the floor. My mother looked up, startled. "What?" she said. "What's wrong?" What was wrong, or rather what was about to happen, had nothing to do with Derek or Jade or dinner tables or old bedrooms. It had to do with Caleb and the hotel 20 minutes away, and a phone call from a hospital that was about to remind both of us that we are, before anything else, surgeons. The call was from a colleague at Atlanta's Grady Memorial Hospital, one of the busiest trauma centers in the Southeast. There had been a multi-car accident on I-285 during the early morning hours. Mass casualty event. They were pulling in every available qualified surgeon in a 30-mile radius, and Caleb's name had come up through the professional network. Would he, and by extension would I, come in? We were both in scrubs and in a rideshare within 22 minutes. My mother stood in the doorway watching us leave with an expression I recognized as the face of a woman who has just understood something new about her daughter. Not the daughter she raised. The one she had always known was competent and driven and smart. But something beyond competence. Something about what it means to be fully realized. The next 6 hours at Grady were the kind that remind you why you chose this work, brutal, precise, high stakes in a way that makes every other kind of high stakes feel manageable by comparison. Caleb and I worked in adjacent ORs, occasionally communicating through the shared wall of process, updated by nurses carrying information between rooms. We are, together, very good. Not in a way we ever had to discuss. It just emerged, early in our relationship, that we operated at the same frequency in high-pressure environments. Steady. Quick. Clear-headed when clarity is a form of survival. By 2 in the afternoon, both of us had cleared our cases. We stood in the hospital corridor in the specific aftermath quiet of a long, successful surgery. Adrenaline still metabolizing, satisfaction still settling. A resident, young, maybe 27, with the wide eyes of someone still learning where the edges of their own competence are, stopped us in the hall. He had apparently been in the adjacent, or watching Caleb work. He said, "Dr. Osei, that dissection you did in the second case, I've never seen anyone move that clean under that kind of pressure. How long have you been doing this?" Caleb answered patiently and thoughtfully, the way he always does with residents, because he remembers being one. I stood beside him and listened. And as I listened, I thought about something he said to me once, early in our time together. That he had been defined for a long time by a loss that made him feel like he was starting from zero, and that starting from zero had turned out to be a gift because it meant he got to build everything intentionally. I understood that. Completely. We drove back to my parents' house in the afternoon. My mother had saved us food. My father shook Caleb's hand again, longer this time, with both hands, the way he does with people he has fully decided about. My Aunt Celeste, who had stayed the night, declared that Caleb was sent directly, and looked at me with the knowing, delighted expression of an aunt who has been waiting for you to arrive at something wonderful. Jade was still there. She was quieter than the night before, not wounded quiet, but the kind of quiet that belongs to someone who has arrived at a decision and feels the particular peace of having finally made it. She helped clear the lunch dishes. She and I existed in the same space without drama, without performance, without the weight of unfinished business pressing everything flat. At one point she stood next to me at the kitchen sink and said, without looking at me, "I called a lawyer this morning. Before I came down for breakfast." I handed her a dish to dry. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. We finished the dishes. Derek had left that morning, early. My mother told me later, with the careful neutrality of a woman navigating a minefield she helped create, that he had packed a bag the night before and gone back to the house. That Jade had found on the kitchen table, a note. That the note had said things that confirmed what Jade had already decided, which is that some choices become inevitable the moment you make them, and Derek had been making his choice, over and over for years. I thought about the 22-year-old version of myself who had trusted him. I felt a distant, mild compassion for her, the kind you feel for someone you used to be. I did not feel anything else about Derek. The account, as far as I was concerned, had been fully closed. The afternoon stretched into evening. At some point Caleb and my father ended up on the back porch with 2 glasses of bourbon and a conversation that I could hear the rhythm of through the screen door. Comfortable, substantive, the cadence of people who have discovered they share a particular frequency. I leaned against the doorframe and watched them without announcing myself, and I thought about what it means to find yourself, not in the motivational poster sense, but in the literal sense of arriving, finally, at the truest coordinates of your own life. I had been afraid of this trip. Not afraid in the trembling sense. I don't tremble anymore, not about this. But cautious. Aware that old places carry old versions of you inside them. That walking into your childhood home can trigger a kind of temporal collapse where who you were reaches out and tries to pull you back into its logic. What had happened instead was something I hadn't fully anticipated. I had come back and found that the old place was smaller than the life I'd built. Not dismissibly small, meaningfully small, in the way of something you've outgrown without knowing it, and realizing it doesn't mean it didn't matter. It means you've grown. It means the growing worked. Before we left, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway. The same hallway where Jade and I had spoken, the same one where I had learned to walk, where I had argued and cried and grown up in the messy, imprecise way that everyone grows up. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when I was 12 and had done something that surprised her. With a mixture of assessment and love and something approaching awe. "I'm proud of you," she said. I should have said that more. I'm saying it now. I hugged her. Properly, fully, without the reservation that had been in every hug since Georgia. "Come for Thanksgiving," I said. "Both of you. Come to Seattle. See our life." She said yes before I finished the sentence. Caleb and I drove to the airport as the Georgia sun went long and golden across the highway. That particular southern evening light that makes everything look like a memory you haven't made yet. He drove. I had my feet up on the dashboard, which he tolerates with the patient amusement of a man who has accepted that this is simply who I am. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. Like I went back into a chapter one thought might still have the power to diminish me, I said. And discovered it couldn't. He nodded. Eyes on the road. "That's a good feeling." "It's the best feeling," I said. And somewhere behind us, in that house that smelled like gardenia candles and pot roast, and the accumulated years of a family working its complicated way toward something better. My sister was making a phone call that was the first true step toward a life she had been afraid to choose. My father was probably already asleep in his armchair. My mother was probably already planning Thanksgiving. And a table that had been set with one story had been cleared to make room for another. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you I forgave everyone and healed completely, and it was all wrapped in a perfect, redemptive bow. But life doesn't do bows. Life does something better than bows. It does, and then, the continuous unfolding sentence of a life that didn't end at the wrong chapter, that kept going past the betrayal and the empty apartment and the rainy Seattle mornings and the late-night surgeries and the City Hall ceremony with 2 witnesses. Kept going all the way to a porch in Georgia at golden hour, all the way to a man who sees you completely, all the way to the version of yourself that the worst night of your life made possible. Derek chose Jade over me. And Jade, without knowing it, chose me over herself. Chose the life that pushed me directly toward the one I was built for. I don't thank them for that. I don't need to. I just live it. Fully. Loudly. Without apology. And that, it turns out, is the most complete revenge and the most complete release, both at once wearing the same face. The face of a woman who knows exactly who she is, sitting next to the man who has always seen her, flying home.